All right, so what was happening with the state of Black America during the Civil Rights? Do you think they were more prosperous, less prosperous during that time, or?
I think what you were beginning to see was just the avalanche of racist policies, whether it was from state governments or whether it was from the Supreme Court, before those started to be unwound with Brown versus Board, and then the progression of the court after that point. And so you were starting to really see the materialization and the heavy impact on frankly the Black community in virtually most of the South, without question, and to a lesser degree in northern communities. And I think that, obviously when you have, frankly, half of the government structure, if not most of the government structure, systematically against your progression. And then you have these other situations going on where you have outside groups whose whole purpose is to, frankly, take away your business, take away your church, the two places that you hold to as a community. Then you're starting to see that dwindling, the dwindling of the community overall, where wealth starts to dissipate, where wealth was once being created with great measure. Now wealth is starting to really dissipate as well, and I think that's what you're seeing as we move into the civil rights era.
Yeah. One thing, that's the education part, I think is a critical one. That we had really outstanding education despite less resources. And what happened was, when these laws were passed, rather than actually providing the resources that were owed to these communities and taxpayers, instead these good Black schools were dissolved. And you put students into schools with teachers who had low expectations. And every type of research, you can go to John Hogbull, famous from Berkeley, basically talks, and this is done in many countries around the world. Any group that's basically taught to be a caste minority, and children are taught with low expectations, they become those low expectations. So our children went from high-performing students and with teachers who cared about them to a situation where we, under the guise of helping, dissolved a lot of very good educational opportunities and put them in really adversarial places. And then you had situations where you end up having these ratios that need to be met really despite no matter what was happening. And so I think that we have to look at that period with, I guess, a little bit more detail, because we had certain goals from it, which is like some of the funny people subverted the actual goals. Like, for example, we had strong economic situations, but all of a sudden, well, if the cost of integration is you've got to lose your Black business district so that we can basically take your buying power and disperse it everywhere, then that's not what we asked for. And so this is one of the things, the civil rights movement, what it's supposed to have happened was equal services for equal taxation, and somehow it went to a different direction, and we see the results of this.
I think going in, it might have been strong, but the tail end effect kind of weaned off. I think going in, it was like, oh, this is a new dawn, new era, new age. And then it kind of just, it didn't go exactly as planned. I think you did see some industries shift. I think there was some movement, like you said, some socioeconomic movement there was getting better, but it's a kind of a tricky period, because right after that, it goes down. But we do have the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act. We have all these acts that come into play, and this is a prime example of, here are the laws, here are the acts, here it is, black and white. The legislation's passed, so why aren't things getting better? You know what I mean? Like, here it is. We've now pen to paper. These are all these orders. Then why isn't everything supposed to be pristine? Because we have far greater issues coming up ahead as we go into some very dark times for the country. Because right after this, we lose one of our greatest leaders, and I think that in and of itself, and I could be wrong, and you guys can definitely tell me, losing Martin Luther King, I think, was a great impact on our community. I think it left us, when he died, feeling like, well, where do we go? Like, we've been led this far. What happens now? Who's gonna lead us? Where do we go? He's been taking us this far. What happens now? And I think without the leader there, and it was kind of vacuous. And then what? you know, so I think that left a hole. And then shortly after that, JFK died, which was another one of our, for the Black community, they felt like, again, here's our president that was for us. Again, they felt that was for us. That was their feeling and their sentiment. And where do we go now? And then Lyndon B. Johnson steps in. And we can hold off that conversation. But you know what I mean?
Don't hold off on James Johnson. Because don't hold off on LBJ, because I think this is where you have a lot of misconceptions that do exist. It's actually in that transition from Kennedy to Johnson, and then following that, the death of Dr. King and
yeah,
so
that whole transition.
And that whole transition period in the 60s is very, very important.
Yeah.
You know, I think, you know, to that point, what always just gets left off the table is that, oh, well, you know, Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. People forget Lyndon Johnson didn't want to sign the Civil Rights Act.
No, he did not.
He did not support it. He actually hardly ever supported it up until that point in American history. And so it was very clear that, you know, whether it was the 65 Civil Rights Act or the one before that in the mid to late 50s or the one before that, they were always Republican supported. Every single one. That gets left off. It doesn't get discussed. I mean, even when they talk about it in news media, they just talk about the Civil Rights Act. They never talk about who actually supported it. You know, when they talk about modern Democrats, or they talk about the Democrat Party writ large, they don't talk about how George Wallace, who was standing in the schoolhouse door, was a Democrat. Mm-hmm. Like, he was not a Republican governor, he was a Democrat governor. And that was actually the policy of the Democrat Party for many, many decades throughout the South. So I think it's important to bring Lyndon Johnson into this. Lyndon Johnson did not want to sign that. He did not. Lyndon Johnson was much more concerned about the Great Society. And the Great Society, you know, that whole entire package of what really is the modern welfare state has been probably one of the most destructive things, not just for the Black community, but frankly, all communities at the low end of the socioeconomic level. Because what it did, to your point, what it did is that it allowed for families at the low end of the socioeconomic spectrum to not formulate, because it was more economically viable for a woman to be in the home alone as a head of household as opposed to being in the marriage. It was more profitable.
It's practical.
It was more practical.
Yes.
And so if that's what you're staring at, and it happens today. If a lady, a mother needs help, and she's like, well, I'm about to go get married, they will tell her, like, well, you know, you're going to lose these benefits if you make too much extra money, or there's somebody else comes into the home, and then that increases your income threshold, so now you don't qualify for these things. That happens today in America. So I think it's important to bring Lyndon Johnson into this. He did not want to do that. In a lot of respects, his hand was forced to do that. But of course, the people who look at history will give him all the credit for it, when that is simply not the case at all.
And he also, to Lyndon B. Johnson, I think a lot of things, you know, he also wanted to give that New Deal feel to his presidency with the Great Society. And what we got out of the Great Society was, the Medicare, Medicaid, right? We got that, which is the Social Security Act, and we also got the Food Stamp Act. Mm-hmm. And what we still have today, we have those remnants today, and we're still struggling with those remnants. And so a lot of people say, well, you know, the reason why the Great Society never flourished because Lyndon B. Johnson was really focused on Vietnam. And I say to them, well, either way, whether he is truly racist or he was focusing on Vietnam, the low income or minorities got the shaft on the deal, right? Like, that's how I look at it. Sure. Either way, we got the shaft on the deal, and we were the ones left holding the bag. At this time, the unwed mother rate in the minority community was going up. I think within 20 years after this Great Society Act, the unwed mother rate was like up by 20%. It forced the hand that was unfolding, it like propelled it forward. So I think that's the problem here with the Great Society Act, is that the rates of the unwed mother was actually pretty low. Right. The poverty rate he was claiming at the time with the Great Society Act was only like 11%. I mean, that's really, in the big scheme of things at that time, I don't think that was super high.
At that time, it was.
Is that, was that really high?
Well, at that time, I mean, it's higher than what we would accept
Except
today.
now, right.
But, in that time, especially when the Great Depression is in your rear view, literally 20 years in your rear view, 25 years, that unemployment rate was somewhat normalized. It was elevated, don't get me wrong,
Right.
but it was still somewhat normalized. I mean, now today, if unemployment is at 7%, people are saying, oh my gosh, we have to do this, we have to do that. But in reality, at that time period, that was elevated a little bit, but it wasn't just astronomical.
Right.
Because, in the Great Depression, unemployment rate was 25, 27, 30%.
Right.
That's what it was. One quick point I want to make, because this is more for the camera, because I think sometimes when people hear, when I just go from from just what happened to black families with the Great Society, I translate it to low socioeconomic families, is because those policies, whether you're white or black or Hispanic, if you were at the lower end of the skills, skill of the labor force with respect to skills, or at the low end of the socioeconomic spectrum in America, those policies, although they might have seemed to help, actually perpetuated those communities further in that trajectory. It just so happens that because of everything that preceded the Civil Rights Act, with Jim Crow and Plessy and all those other things, and the economic impacts it had on the black community, there was a significantly larger portion of the black community compared to the rest of America that was at the low socioeconomic end of the spectrum. And so that's, even though it might have perpetuated people being able to keep it moving a little bit, it also at the same time limited the level of innovation and a level of ability to excel and move beyond those things, because essentially out of the impact of those policies are really what's created probably the number one, not even probably, the number one issue in the black community, and it's fathers not being in the home. And it perpetuated that policy. It perpetuated that issue, excuse me. And so I think it's important, when people are watching these things, to understand why the translation just between just black America to people at the low end of the socioeconomic spectrum.
Absolutely.
Like one thing, being in Florida, and we're seeing how much of our areas are rural, or even you go just to mountains, that these are the realities for. This is actually a reality for many Americans, and I think what happens is sometimes when we talk about. Sometimes people, when they say that it may benefit black people, they don't understand that it benefiting black people, it's benefiting everyone else who's been disaffected. And so people have to kind of come down from that and think a little bit more critically about these things. Now, there is one point when you're making about us being in a second
Renaissance.
Yeah. One aspect, there's a dynamic to it, which I think we can't forget, is that why 68 on had the disastrous effects of, say, what's going off track, which we don't acknowledge, is that after Dr. King was killed, all the catharsis and upset of him being killed turned into riots. The problem with the riots is, when the riots were done, all those districts were destroyed, and there's no one coming back. There was no rebuilding them. You got areas like Detroit.
Reconstruction.
No second reconstruction. You had areas that when they burned down in '68. They're dead till today, and so I would say this is something that we can understand. We had our stuff this summer. If we really are going to do this part two, we cannot allow these riots of this summer to make it acceptable to have these areas in these cities to just be like no-fly zones. They have to be seen. No, because what happens now is we actually watched, many of us with glee, fires going, because we like seeing fires, but the problem was people live there. And unless we're willing with the same passion to rebuild their communities for them and get those businesses back, these people no longer have businesses to go to. They no longer have elders to look up to. I mean, this is a big deal, and I think this is something that happened in the 60s, which there was the degree, because again, it's a cathartic situation. So emotionally, you feel it. Like, that's what I want to see happen. I want, because I'm exploding inside, I want to see stuff explode.
Right.
The problem is, those of us who can see otherwise or see outside of that, we have to understand that after you've had a cathartic moment, we can't just let you stay in that state. We've now actually got to build this back, because we understand that you've got to have your needs, your goods and services back. You've got to have your elders. You've got to have the flow back, because otherwise, what we've done now, we have just culled out urban areas that could be destroyed in the next 40 years if we don't actually go back in and get those restarted.
Well, that's what I saw over in the Tampa area, I mean, that was just a small microcosm of the summer. It didn't go on as long as some of the other areas in the United States, but my husband and I drove down, and Fowler Avenue, where it's a urban area, and I love to go down there. I love to go down to the area. The Foot Action was destroyed. The Dollar General was destroyed. There was a bunch of other stores destroyed, and I'm like, those are jobs. Those are businesses. Those are people's livelihoods. And a bunch of people online were responding to my posts, and they were like, oh, that's just a casualty. The insurance will take care of it. And I'm like, no, that's not how that works. Sorry about that. And you know, for those of you watching, like when somebody gets their business destroyed, sometimes insurance doesn't cover it, or not all of it. You have to come out of pocket. It's a lot of to do when you're the one, the burden's on you. And when you have employees that now don't have a job, and you're trying to help your employees, it takes a lot out of you, especially when you're like a family for those small businesses that got destroyed and that got looted and rioted. Like, it's not okay to hurt because you're hurting. The way to get back at that is to put into your community what you want to see out of it. And it's like, that's what our community's not understanding. They're not putting anything in to get out of it. You're just going up to your doorstep every day, turning your key, collecting whatever you can get out of it. That's not how this works. You got to put into it. So, I mean, that would be my message to anyone out there over these next coming weeks, years, whatever happens, is that we need to start going local and put into our community and build up that way. I think that needs to be expressed strongly, and I think that's where we got lost over the summer, because for some reason it was like, oh, I don't care, it's not my stuff, or that there was a real disconnect, and I was baffled, and that honestly was what made me join BLEXIT, because I was like, I've got to do something. Like, what's going on here? I was like, there's just such a bad disconnect going on. I'm like, I have to do something, and that's what motivated me the most. So
2016, they did a study that said that 69% of Americans could not access $400 cash or credit. 69% of Americans across the board, everybody. Now imagine you amplify that with all this. If there's not a time for reinvestment in our businesses and reinvestment in our communities right now, especially at this moment right now, this is a moment we really can say, if we're really going to be together, we want to say we have this new society we want to see, this is the time to actually pull in, reconstruct, and actually make use of everyone's gifts. Because right now, especially after this COVID thing, again, now that we've made 60% of the people non-essential, these are people that we have said that basically your gifts and talents are of no value to us. And we found a way to somehow get you out, and I hope things work out for you. We need to do an inventory, and part of it has to do with asset inventory. We do so much deficit inventory. What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? We don't say what's right. What can you do? What can you do? What can you do? What can you do? We don't do this for our kids. Like with our kids, even education-wise, if we say from the time you come into school, well, let's try to notice what are the gifts and talents that are innate in these children, and let's help them get there. And then as they get to become adults, that will even make their decisions better. If they all of a sudden have a dream to achieve, they're not going to make bad decisions because I want to achieve that dream. But if it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. And if we're going to do anything, we need to do an actual asset-based inventory. What is good about us?
yeah.
Well, it's funny you said that because, when I talk with, high school students and even college students, I tell them there's a book. It's called, there's actually a book for this. It's called Strength Finders 2.0. It's by a guy named Tom Rath. I recommend it everywhere I go. And what it does, write that down, man. That's
You got it.
What was it called?
Strength Finders 2.0. I did it myself. I did it when I was younger. That's all I'm gonna say about that. But at any rate, so I did it myself, and what it does, it's more of like a personality type test, but it's a small book, not very big. But when you take the test, it'll give you like your 5 strengths. And then you go in and you read them. So you might be an analytic, you might be an activator, you might be a relator, or you might be a strategic, or an ideator, or a woo-woo, or people who are like the life of parties and stuff like that. At any rate, what it'll do then, it'll go and in each one, it'll just tell you about that personality trait, that strength trait, and then it'll tell you like what kind of jobs or positions you should think about working in. And before I took it, I was just like, I'm trying to figure out my way, what am I good at? And I took it and I was like, oh man, that is me. Oh man, that is me. And it goes to your point, because if you identify the strengths of people, then they focus on their strengths. And in the book it says, is like, one of the great misconceptions is, especially in schooling, is schooling tries to mitigate your weaknesses. But when you're in the real world, you don't work in your weaknesses. You work in the things you're good at,
Yeah.
those things that make you happy. And so if you actually focus it into finding the strengths in people, finding the talents that, that every person is blessed with, and then that's the trajectory you move your life in, actually it'll make you far more profitable, far more happy, and far more viable in the world to do the things that allow you to prosper. So yeah, strength
That
finders.
actually brings
2.0.
us in our last section of the promised land. So what can we do as Black people to move forward and to be prosperous and not really go back to how it was before, but embody that same type of strength and power and innovation that we had back then, and we were encouraged. We were more encouraged.
Gratitude. I say that's a value which we don't understand. It's our greatest value. If we appreciate our gifts, we appreciate our health, we appreciate our family, we appreciate having gratitude, makes you able to not see the world in a bad way. You say, all right, this is what I do have. Again, I've done my inventory. These are the things I have. The things that I can do, these are the good things. So from that, I can take a step towards that. I say, without gratitude, you're lost.
I mean, I think it's a couple things, and I agree with that 100%. I think from a political standpoint, I think that the Black community has to frankly embrace all sides of the political spectrum.
Right.
We have had a propensity in American history to be one-sided when it comes to politics. Like,
Since you're here,
Yeah.
why is that? Why do you think that is, that we're so,
honestly though,
it's one-sided?
I think it's because the nature of the Black community and the Black experience in America post-Reconstruction, or even frankly during slavery, was we're all in this same system and situation together. Our battle is with the slaveholder. Our battle is with the Klan. Our battle is with the government. And so, so our battle is with poverty. Our battle is with education. And so if you look at the Black experience overall, our battle has always been almost singularly focused against one common enemy, if you will. And I think going forward with where the country is now, our community has to actually embrace the entire spectrum of politics, because as a community, what's quietly happened, even though people don't really report on it, is that our thoughts as a community are such a wide spectrum. The way we view religion, the way we view families, the way we view entertainment, the way we view law. There's actually a wide, disparate spectrum of thought. And so I think our community has to step into that and actually embrace that across the entire spectrum. The second big thing to that, in my opinion, is education. I think as a community, we have to, and it's already started to begin. This isn't like new stuff, but as a community, we have to fully embrace the individuality of our children and make sure that they get into the academic environment that they need for them to thrive based upon their strengths and abilities. And I think that those are probably the two key things that will actually take us, into the promised land, so to speak. Like, I believe we're in the middle of the second Black Renaissance. I wholeheartedly believe that. I think what takes us beyond it, so that we don't step back, is not being caught into one side of the American experience. Is really actually to proliferate into all aspects of the American experience.
I'll share this. There's something that happened a few days ago that speaks to this. We used to be a lot more strategic than we are now. That we need to have a much more nuanced view of things, very, very almost simple view of things at this moment like that. I mean, and there's a story. There's this marsh sparrow who lives in the marshlands you see in like Georgia, South Carolina. It makes its nest just above the waterline, so it's high enough that the fish can't get at them, but then low enough that the predators can see it. And its whole battle is understanding that both from the sky and from the water, that there's adversaries on both sides, and that literally, if they raise it too high, raccoons can get you. If you fall into the water, they actually will eat your young. And it's one of those things where we can't say that like this pole is good and this pole is bad. Is that both pole extremes can be bad. And that we have to understand that we have to operate a place where we're actually nuanced and we're actually like a dance. Like really almost like case by case, like let's see if this works, doesn't work, this is good for us, not good for us, this is good for us, not good for us, and not be really, because our strategy is not what it used to be. We used to be a lot more like see 10 steps ahead, and now it's kind of like, well, they said they like us, so I guess they like us.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
The flexibility of, like you said, we need to be more flexible in how we approach life and how we're looking at things. I think for most of us, I think education is a huge one. I know being of Caribbean American descent, growing up, there was no choice. We are going to college. There was no options. We went from high school to college. My parents, they were not educated. They came to this country in 1968. They had 5 children. I was the baby of 5, and that's it. That was all it was. We're going to get a better opportunity in America, and that's all you got. And so education was instilled in us. My mother had 11 grandchildren. All of them are educated. That's just how it is in the Caribbean culture. And so I always say, in the African American culture, we have to pass that down, right? Like it has to be passed down, it has to be made important. And I think even if it's vocational school, like a welder or a plumber, I'm not gonna call a lawyer to come fix my toilet, right? Or, electrician. I need all those vocational skills. And those skills make a lot of money. And that's 18 to 24 months of schooling. Even that opportunity, that's a lot less debt than 4 years of college. Even pushing that in the community would be a lot better, and you'd be in a better space for most of the African American community. I think just open up basic checking and savings account, financial literacy, all those things help. 2 is better than 1. Our marriage rates are very low. Why are we not marrying? There's a lot of other external issues with that, but, we got to build this together, right? Like marrying, building up generational wealth, handing it down to the next person. You notice other countries, they bring like their whole families over and they live in a communal space, right? And then the house gets handed down, right? And then the next generation and the next generation, that's generational wealth. I think those are some of the things that you can take advantage of. And they have all these first-time homebuyer programs. They have a lot of programs out there to support low income or even first-time home buyers or whatever you're trying to do. There's a lot of programs out there that support African Americans, and I don't think we take advantage of them.
If you've already decided the game's over from the beginning, you're not going to see it. And that's kind of where, again, you got to visualize that. Like, I lived in the Pacific for a long time, and the traditional navigators, they would teach you all the technical skills. But at the end of the day, let's say to get from Hawaii to Tahiti, there's so much crazy that can happen to you. The only way you're really going to get there is if you see it. And that's the last step they teach them, is that you have to see it. If you see it, no matter what comes at you, you're going to make it. But if you don't see it, there is no trying to get anywhere. I'm doing.
You do or you don't do.
That's it. And we have to get back to that mind, because again, if we're going to look at history as a model, you talk about financial literacy skills. In our past, during Jim Crow, when people burned stuff down, we had banks. So if we had banks when you got terrorists outside, I think we could have banks now. I think this it's almost ridiculous. We need to stop. We need to get past ourselves. And I'll say, well, part of our say, this is, we're taking liberty now, but speak of our role as elected officials is to eliminate barriers to people achieving their personal best. I say that's our job, is to get the barriers out of the way so you can be you. And we have to understand, but that's responsibility of being you. And so that may be a little scary as well, because the scariest thing in the world is actually having agency over yourself, because now it's on you. And that's something we've got to get back to. That's something we should aspire towards. That's what our children say. When I become a young man or young woman, I now am stepping into, I own my life. And that should be what we teach them, is that your childhood prepared you for that time where you actually say, now, I own my decisions. I visualize my future. I'm taking steps to do so, and I'm creating the network of support to help me get there because I've got to have that as well. And that's part of it too, is understanding the value of that as well, as that in recognizing one's gifts, also creating that group of people who will help get you there, because there's no individual who makes it on their own. It's always going to be with others.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think understanding critical thinking and just emphasizing the importance. I mean, I remember hearing when I was a kid, no question is dumb, and keep asking questions. And I think if anything we've learned today, it's a million questions is not enough. There's a lot to question, a lot to look into. Just because you've been given a story doesn't mean that that's how it actually happened. So almost unlearning some of what we've been taught, because it's wrong and it's not real history. And so we've got pieces of real history, and if we keep telling truth, it's the truth telling, it's the constant truth telling.
Yeah, to your point, I think one of the things in school, watching it with my sons, when they teach history, they teach dates. They teach dates and they teach instances. To what we were saying earlier in our conversation, they don't teach context.
Right.
And how this led to that, and how this situation then led to the third. And that's one of the key things that is always missed. I want to follow up on your point on financial literacy. I was in a YMCA one day talking to like a group. It was like 200 high schoolers, middle schoolers, in an after-school program. And so they were all in the gym, and I came in, and I was like, I asked all the guys to get up and go to the other side of the gym and stand in a line, and they were like end to end, the entire gym. Mostly black boys and Hispanic boys, some white boys, was fine. And I'm in there talking to them, and the girls were still sitting on the bleachers. And I said, now young ladies, I want you to listen to me. I was like, how many of y'all want to grow up? I said, who here wants to grow up poor? Of course, nobody raises their hand. I said, okay, who wants their children, or who wants to live poor? Nobody raises their hand. I said, so I got the first thing I'm gonna tell you right now. So you see these guys behind me? They're like, yeah. I was like, do not have a child with any one of these guys before you get married. And the boys are looking at me like, what you doing? What you doing? But in all seriousness, it's for them to understand that the number one pathway for you to living outside of poverty is to actually, if you're going to have children, have them in a two-parent household. Right. Because the two of you working together, you actually propel each other. Right. And you create a much more stable environment for your kids. The last thing, I would say is that our young people have to learn, and our people in general have to learn, you can't spend every dollar you make. Yeah. Like, you gotta save 10% of your money. Like, it's hard, but if you get in the practice of saving 10% of your money, paying yourself before you pay your credit card bill, or you are at the Louboutin store and you shouldn't be at the Louboutin store,
not be at the Louboutin,
or you're at off Saks, or you're in the outlet mall down on Vineland, like, you gotta, look, some people shouldn't be at the Louboutin store.
Should not be at the Louboutin store
with your paycheck. You should be at the Louboutin store with your savings account.
Right.
After, this is important, after you paid your taxes. Okay, let's make sure that's clear. But that being said, I think it's saving that money, paying yourself first. That actually begins to propel you on the trajectory to being financially independent. Because then once you're financially independent, then whether it's politics or whether it's anybody else who might look at you a certain way, what they think about who you are based upon the color of your skin don't even matter anymore, because now you are financially free. Like, you've escaped, you've achieved, or on your way to achieving escape velocity, where you don't need to be tied into the mush of, well, I'm at this job because I have nowhere else to be, and I don't know if my supervisor wants to propel me, or if that's what's caught up in your mind and your psyche. Whether that's true or not is almost irrelevant. You're not free as an individual because you're not financially free. And I think, in our community, the Promised Land is also part of that.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the conversation we had with Jody. I was saying, we should focus more on financial literacy than social issues.
Oh, yeah.
Financial literacy, that'll be our saving grace. That'll free us.
Well, and when you think about, money and what you can do with money, and after paying all your taxes and all of that, it's empowering, and it's, I can do this and I can do that. And with socials programs, you're like, this is what they get because they can't get here, to this level or whatnot. And I think kind of touching on education, something kind of important is to think about when we are having kids, who is going to be educating our children? Who are we putting in front of our children to teach lessons? Because if it is people that don't understand history, if they don't know, they're not going to be teaching our kids. So therefore our kids, we're failing our kids because we're putting public school, is not a good place, and they're probably not teaching any of this there. So I think it's important to really consider, you see moms with babies at 6 months worrying about where they're going to send their kid, in kindergarten. And it's well, because you really want to know who's going to be in front of your kid teaching. With a lot of these leftist agendas we're seeing now, it's just more and more important to know what information your children are receiving.
Right, I agree.
I think also too, entrepreneurship. We say that a lot, but not everybody's meant to be an entrepreneur.
Very true.
I think we need to put that in perspective. I see a lot of, the little car washes on the side of the road, and I'm like, okay, that's great, and that's a good idea, but I think you have to expand upon that. You need to make sure you're paying taxes on that, and not everybody has that mindset to actually follow through with what that means. So, I think there needs to be financial literacy first, and then you build upon that if that's something you're really wanting to do. But entrepreneurship is a great way to excel if you're really good at it at a business and moving forward. And I think we are in the promised land. I think we have the gifts here. I think we are moving forward and building upon a better life. But I think it's for us, like I said, to get the message out there, move forward, and build a better community for all of us.
I think probably one of the biggest things is that Black people are doing a lot better than the TV is going to tell us anyway. If you listen to the TV, you know what I'm saying? Exactly. You would think that it's not going good. So just.
I'll tell you one more story on that point. So I got all kind of stories, but I was in a town hall meeting a couple years ago. It was in my state house district at the time. And I had just come back, I believe it was my second legislative session. So we were right before the next round of elections. So the Democrats are in on force, trying to question me about everything, to get videotape, and they're recording me. And and my staff was like, stop letting them ask questions. And I'm like, oh no, let them go. I'll answer any question they have. So there was actually, it was a young Black kid. He must have been 22 years old. And he stood up and he was just he was explaining to me, he was like, I don't really feel like I could get ahead in America. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I just don't see it for me. And I literally looked at the top of my hands and I was just like, do you even understand my story? Do you know who I am? And I try to remind sometimes people in the culture, I try to remind them just because I wear a suit jacket, you don't think I grew up a certain way. I grew up in the inner city of Brooklyn, New York. Grew up poor. That's where I'm from. And I was telling this young kid, I said, look, my mom, pushed me hard. She wanted me to excel. She did not accept excuses. There was definitely the pathway and the ability for me to excel if I chose to excel. And so, I was like, I'm about to turn 40. You're 22. If I'm in the point in life where I am by number one, the grace of God, number two, my talents and abilities, don't tell me you can't be there. That you have a complete misconception of where we are. And that speaks to your point where on TV, the misconception is that this is the worst of times for Black America. Well, hold on, let me roll that back. Prior to November 3rd, it was the worst of times for Black America. Yes. And now, after November 3rd, it's not the best of times for Black America. That makes no sense. But that being said, that's what TV and media will give you, as opposed to our young people understanding that this period of time, and I wholeheartedly believe this period of time, the last 30 years in America, give or take, is actually the best of times for Black America. And it's only going to get better from here.
Actually, there's one cultural example which is very example. The movie Black Panther broke every single rule that's supposed to have been in terms of who was in it, how it was marketed, everything. That movie was the first movie on Earth to make $1 billion in 30 days. And it was based on bringing this culture forward, and it was marketed as this. And a point, but until that moment where they took the risk to do it, Everyone said no. You
be
always have to
successful.
have a white main character. You have, and that's just how movies are made, and these are the rules. And it's interesting because if you look at movies, you can look at Perfect Figures is another one. Good black movies, the ones that aren't like silly, usually they are the most profitable movies because you usually will cost about $20 million and they'll make about $250 million. That ratio is pretty much not seen, but it's seen with the movies that are created with our themes. The world wants to see those themes. Point is, the world sees our achievement. I mean, it may not be in the media here about us, but the world sees this, and this actually sells. It works. It actually is something. And going back to Black Panther, that's the embodiment of it. It was a retelling of how humanity came about, and it had a very strong story of black men and black women, and it put them in front of the stage, and the world celebrated them. And you saw financially the world celebrated them.
Yeah, big time.
I loved everybody going to the theaters in their kente, man.
Word.
I like that. That was cool. I'm watching it on Facebook, like, everybody going to the movies and they, okay.
That was cool.
I think also too civic engagement, like you touch upon it, like knowing both political parties and what they stand for. It shouldn't be, well, why are you Democrat? Because it's they're not racist. That's not an actual definition of why are you a Democrat. You know, I really think there needs to be some kind of civic engagement, like kind of teaching, because we're lacking and we're just one-sided. Yes, we have definitely grown exponentially about on being more conservative and going kind of back to our roots in this last election, but I think we overall need to have more of I think we need to go through more of a process with kind of refining how we think about that, because I think we could do better on why we think. I'm not saying we have to all be one side on this side either. I'm just saying formalize that thought about why, though, because I hear a lot about, because they're just not the racist party. It's like, that's not a good reason.
Well, from our community, like from the standpoint of where I'm from, black people only became Democrats based on the election for John F. Kennedy, and it was a hard push to a lot of people because they said that this will be a method that gets where we need to go. Yeah. And so there was a lot of strategic thinking. This was a strategic move that we were with a party who really had supported our needs all up until then. They said, we're going to make this jump because we think this guy and his platform can get us somewhere. And somehow our critical thinking, like, and again, our vote shouldn't come this easy. They should be earned, not just, taken for granted.
Well, look, please. Being an elected Republican,
yes,
I'm gonna be very critical of my party.
Yes.
And this is why I'm gonna be critical of the party, because the party, to be blunt, stopped looking to the black community for votes.
Yeah.
They were basically like, well, we can get our votes out of the suburbs and we can get them out of the rural areas. And before you had white flight in urban corridors, and we'll get them out of parts of urban corridors. And so the party, looking at it from a purely electability, an election situation, said, well, we got all the votes we need. We don't have to do that.
That's real.
And even when Nixon made the whole group Hispanic, that was because to try to counter the black vote with the Hispanic vote. That was the purpose of that under Nixon's strategy in '60. And so you had this trajectory within the Republican Party of, we don't really need black votes. And so now what we're facing as a party is the reality that, man, you need every vote you can get.
Yeah.
Who are you fooling?
You need all of them.
You need all the votes.
Yeah.
And so, I think, I was actually, just the place I was earlier today. I was like, look, we as a party cannot walk through America thinking that all we have to do is just roll out our policies and just say, lower taxes, more freedom, and government out of your way, and think that's good enough. Like, you actually have to court people. Like, you actually have to engage them.
Yes.
You have to actually, don't just say it on TV, then I never see you. I bet to see you, like, in the community, actually engaging, actually getting to know the things that people in the black community are actually talking about. Because, what happens a lot when I'm in Dunbar and Fort Myers, people come up to me and they be like, man, I know you're a Republican, but I like you. And I'm just like, oh, that's cool. I mean, that's cool. I appreciate that. But what ends up happening is when you build that relationship first, then it gives you the opportunity to build on the policy and say, you know what, T, this is why this policy works not only for you, but also for your family and also for your community. And what they're talking about is going to lead to this, that, and the third. But if I don't have a relationship with you, I'm just another dude on the street running my mouth.
Right.
Yep.
And that's where I think, even though I think it's important, I said earlier, like as a community, we have to really permeate the entire political experience. It's incumbent on the Republican Party to actually engage the black community. Like, you can't sit and wait and, for all of the things that the media loves to talk about with 45, he was the first
Yep.
to say, you know what, I'm gonna go over here and try to get some of these votes.
Yep.
And,
What did you have to lose?
what do you have to lose? He
Yep.
was the first that did
And
it.
we heard
He did it.
We heard it all.
He did it his way, but he was the first.
Yep.
And I think that the party can't lose sight of that. The party, if I have anything to say about it, is that we're going to start from that point and then go forward and continue to do more.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that too is what I was noticing as I was kind of reading through the outline is that Republicans have always set the policies, and then somehow the follow through didn't go through correctly. Like, as I was going in the 1900s, they set a lot of great policies, like the Reconstruction Act, and there was a lot of other fair acts going on, but then somehow the Democrats came in and then they did their own version of it. And it's like, oh, no, why didn't they do that? And it's like, I noticed there was like the shifts in power, and I'm like, well, why didn't they follow up and do this then? But there was never that push. It's like, we need you to push. So I think now we're starting to see like the Republicans are like saying, you know what, we're gonna start doing this push. We're gonna start coming down the pipeline. We're gonna make sure we're going through everybody and permeating like you're saying. So, yeah.
Well, and I think one other thing we deal with in general is that there's a lot of room to bring voter education awareness. So people don't even know what's happening in local government. They think they're going into the voting booth and only voting for a president. They have no idea they've got 15 to 20 plus more candidates that are the most important people on their ballot, because that's what's happening at home. And so people are completely just don't understand the structure of government, and then you say, where do you start? People literally don't know where to start. I mean, picking up a phone, making an email is so simple, but that takes a little bit of work, and so then people fall off. And so it's, sticking through, getting it done, and continuous education of the process and who you need to be paying attention to, local candidates and all that.
Right.
Great
So,
discussion.
on the topic of Black prosperity, do you guys have any questions to ask the panelists, or?
Well, there was something
Got
you
about 10
mentioned
more
earlier
minutes.
about you sort of about feelings versus facts.
Yeah.
And I feel like to some degree feelings are being manipulated nowadays. Like for example, my mother is a Democrat, and she grew up. She was a child of the 1950s, and she grew up in Mississippi, and her mother, my grandmother, worked in Head Start and worked with a lot of poor families and many black families, and I think she kind of looks at things through the lens of some of the ways that blacks in her area were treated at that time, and I guess my question is, do you feel like a lot of it is feelings being manipulated to some extent, like my mom is kind of being taken back to that time in her memories.
I think that, yes, but I think if you actually take a look at the landscape of political history, not just here in the United States, but frankly around the world, there's always a manipulation of emotions. You see, what lame politicians rely on is for you not to actually have a real understanding of what's happening and the context of what is happening and the actual history of policy or what's going on economically or even society. It is easier for it's easier for me to get you to vote for me if I'm telling you that's your problem. It's much easier that way. And so I think that, yeah, you're seeing that now, but there's always been, frankly, this has always occurred in our politics, and not just with black voters. It's happened with white voters as well. It's happened with Spanish voters as well. Some of the major things we've seen politically that's occurred in South America through South America's highly tumultuous political history is you'll have the rising political figure manipulates the emotions of the body politic to then overthrow the regime or make a change or whatever the case might be. So emotions are part of part of politics. The thing that's really, really important is that, number one, we have not just politicians but statesmen, and yes, stateswomen, but that's what you have. And then number two is that those people who are actually given the public trust, they stamp out these knucklehead people who have nothing to offer except in the wanting to twist emotions for their own political gain. The third part is an educated electorate. Like if the electorate is not educated, it does not matter who you elect, because those people will do what frankly most people will do, and that's seek their own interests and seek their own power. So it is happening today. It has always happened in America, frankly. And this is something that, even we have succeeded to such a degree in spite of sometimes the lower nature that does exist amongst all human beings, because the very structure of our government is one with dispersed and limited power. I would shudder to think what America would be like if it was an autocracy, because then the change of political leadership would be an iron fist that frankly would erode the liberties of people immediately.
There's a book called Hunting Deer with Jesus, and it's very interesting. It speaks to this point. This guy was a journalist, progressive journalist, who went back home. He's from Appalachia, and he wondered why he said, why do they vote against their own interest? He went there, and in talking with them, he realized there was many years of promises. And people thought this through and realized that no, they were pretty much going to vote for anyone but who was telling them what was the right things. And the book's very interesting because it is a very, very interesting story of how much people really desire to have good representation, but when they're let down, the kind of sadness and depression that comes. I mean, this is a community where the Walmarts are closing up, and then people kept promising, but there's nothing to empower them, and it just got worse. And so they would honestly have voted for Talking Frog if the Talking Frog is just like, I'm doing something different than what the last guys did for me, and that's the thing. It's like it's real like that. Is that elected officials, we have to do our job, which is actually meet the needs, listen to, connect to, and actually meet those needs as opposed to just simply empower ourselves.
Right.
Answer your question, Adam?
What was that book called?
Yeah.
Hunting Deer with Jesus.
Hunting Deer with Jesus?
Yes. Oh, even on that note, it even talked about even gun rights. That if someone's relationship, let's say, was only someone coming to your house to evict you or to take your moonshine and steal away, seriously speaking, you're going to want to have a weapon. It really was on that level. It went to every little bit of everything. It was a very interesting book.
What was the name of the book again?
Hunting Deer with Jesus.
Hunting Deer.
Deer with Jesus, yes.
Okay.
Do you have anything you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I was thinking about, you were talking about having expectations when you were growing up, and consequences of not fulfilling those expectations. Oh, that were rough, I know. But I don't think the children of right now have as many expectations what we did or what I did just growing up. I mean, you had to go to school, you had to finish school, you had to go to college. It's just like one thing after another, or elsewise you would not get the benefits of what you would get. Like I decided I wasn't going to go to college, and they come got my card. So.
Yeah, I think in society today, the expectations of, especially in the minority community, the expectation is to the kids. I think some parents are setting expectations and some kids are following through, but I think there is a lack of setting the expectation, the bar high, and I think there isn't a lot of follow through happening. I think they're slowly waking up to trying to do it more. Mm-hmm. I think panels like these, BLEXIT, Congressman Donalds, and Councilman Jaha is helping to get that expectation out there. But I think now we're in a time where we're bringing this information to the forefront. We're bringing up like, hey, this is an issue, and we're trying to bring all this awareness, and I think it starts with awareness. First, you got to say you have a problem, right? And then you go forth. And I think the problem right now is we have half the community going, yeah, there's a problem, the other half saying, well, the problem is the other side. And I think that narrative needs to switch. So we have a tide that's turning, and I see the turn. It's like making a U-turn and you see half the car, and it's like this, and we just need to keep getting that turn till we pivot. And it's hard, and it's gonna take a while till everybody can turn together. And we may still not get everybody, but I guarantee you the majority of people are, I think this monolith that we all think alike, the African American community, is going away. That's for sure. I can pretty guarantee the next election, I think that will not be a factor. We all have decided, that monolith, we are no longer a monolith. They will unfortunately have a new direction they're going with, but we will constantly say we are not a monolith. We can now critically think, and we're moving that direction. So I think we're on the right track. But yes, expectations, and setting those expectations for the generation to come. Because like we said here today, 50 years after slavery, expectations were set and they were met, and people prospered. So why can't we do it now?
Well, and I think we have a faction that is teaching us that expectations aren't needed. They've got all kinds of agendas. Their agendas is literally to confuse everybody. I mean, I don't want to mention the gender identity, but there's actually amongst the 60 plus, there's literally one that's definition is to confuse, and so I think that's part of the agenda is just, with no expectations, you don't really have to think, you don't have to use your mind, and so therefore you're just a couch potato and you're there and you're not fulfilling any expectation.
Your food.
Yeah.
Your food
Yeah,
to be hunted.
yeah.
I mean, if you don't have a destination, any road will take you there, and we exist to self-actualize. That's just where it is, and we exist to self-actualize both individually and as a community. And the only way you can self-actualize is actually setting a high bar of achievement for oneself. And we can't let people deceive us into saying we shouldn't have it, or because things have happened to you, you shouldn't have a high bar.
Right.
It does not matter, honestly. Like, you have to. That's why we live. That's why we respirate. We respirate on earth to be our personal best, and that's it. We can't let anyone take us off that path of being. And that's the question: is this act helping empower me to be my personal best, or is it taking away from it? And really, those are the kind of calculation we need to do. And if anyone's telling you anything that's going to prevent you from being your personal best, they're a deceiver to try to take you off your path. And that's just what it comes down to. That's why we're on earth, is to be our best.
No expectation is too high. You can't have too high expectation, because it's really just a goal, something you're trying to achieve. And if you can get there, you've done a lot, especially the higher it is, the more you've accomplished.
And I also like what you said about the trade schools. Yeah, our daughter, I homeschooled her for 2 years and sent her to college, and we were living in Manhattan when she went to Georgia. Middle Georgia College, never been there in her life, dropped her off, that was it. But she changed all of her basic values and everything after going to school for 4 years. And she's 30 now. We're working her back in.
Gotta return her back in.
Gotta work back in, yeah. But I'm a big fan of kids going to trade school and getting, it was like indoctrination to her, getting a trade and being able to make money. She doesn't have any debts because we did all that for her, but still, I think trade schools should really be revisited.
And when you find out what the purpose of some of these college institutions are, and the extended, the pipeline, if you will, extending from, your public indoctrinated systems to now your, next set of indoctrinated systems, it's, they're pumping at 18, as soon as you're getting out of high school, go to college, and be in debt. You know what I'm saying? So talk about financial literacy. You're 18, you don't even understand financial literacy, and now you're in debt. I mean, you're just setting yourself up for low expectations, not success, and it's just a cycle. And
Third
part of the system.
Miseducation of the Negro. Let's give you one more book.
Another good book.
And this book, it speaks to this point right here. And it talks about this one guy who, his mother was a washerwoman. She did laundry. That was her business. And he went to school. He thought that was of no value. Now, so he studied Latin and Greek, and he was adjunct professor barely alive. Where he had another guy studied those mechanics of how to run these machines and actually owned the laundromats in the black community. He could have easily, by virtue of being apprenticed through being his mother's son, he knew how to do it, but he didn't see the value in it. And I tell you, just from these building trades, these trades that are actually what run the world. That's where, and so we don't understand the value of it. This is we may not have the glamour on it, but the actual modes of production. If you can do those skills, you will always be employed, and you will always be needed, and you will be essential.
Yes, we want to be essential, not non-essential. Yeah.
And that just ties me back to what I was trying to finish up with, is that you would see why there's no emphasis on trade school if, the college institution is just an extended indoctrination camp. So it makes sense that not as many people are thinking about trade school as an option.
Because we do need all those workers, we need the plumbers, the electricians, we need all those vocational skills in the world. If I was somebody, if I could do it all over again, I would really think about a trade, because, after, pumping through school, I did the magnet program. I graduated with an associate's degree when I left high school. I was exhausted. I was like, what I would give for just, kind of just have a part-time job and go to trade school, right? Like, rethinking it. Then I wouldn't have the debt. Talk about paying off your debt, not going. And then I would have had the money to funnel through to actually pay for a 4-year degree if I so wanted one. It's not saying college is out of the picture. It's just saying reimagine what you could do if you actually could pay for the college degree and not be in the debt.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Off the bat.
And I think that's the thing about all this, that really we rethink it, but we're just told coming out of the gate that we have to go, right? And I know for my parents, they gave me what they had because they didn't have an education, so they ingrained in me, you need to get one, right? And I understood that now that I'm older. When I was, 18, I was like, why, right? But I get it now because I'm older, but that's okay. I'm doing good, right? I rose above and I did exactly what I was supposed to do. But now I can tell my children moving forward, this is, hey, let's think about this, right?
Options.
These are the options. So it's okay, but these are some like food for thought.
There's a hybrid way also. I did an interview for the director of the Charlotte DeSoto Building Industry Association, and what kids can do, because we have such a need for the building trades, is that you actually, if they're working when they're going to school, that job you have could actually be an apprenticeship with a trade. Mm-hmm. So not only when you finish your degree, you'll actually have that certificate in that trade. So you're good. And so that's something we're encouraging young people to do, is that if you've got to do something to maintain your college, why not do that thing that's going to be able to give you another up and give you another skill set you can draw from.
And I almost feel like that path is more kind of throws you into the real world a lot quicker, because when you go right to college, it's almost like an extension of social, like a social life, and you're not really picking up those work skills or like you said, you can apply the trade to as an internship. So there's more options than just going to school, being in class all the time and not working. And you're learning a lot more skills when you're with, if you go right into the job, you might be working with older folks. In college, you're more likely to be around kids your own age. So you're just not developing as well as you could, kind of being thrown into the real world.
There is something also in that regard. We have what we call a graduation-based system rather than an apprenticeship-based system. Like Germany, 50% of their young people actually are apprenticed in something, which means the thing about apprenticeship different than graduation. Graduation only means permission to learn. It doesn't mean you learn anything. But we think when you get that diploma that you've learned something. No, you've only been open to that world of that trade. But as apprenticeship, you're actually in a social group, learning those skills in context, and so it's immediately applicable. And that's something we got to realize too, is that that's really probably a better way that serves us better, is that we can find some way to have context for education. Right now, these are selfish endeavors for myself, basically to extend my high school longer. Just hang out.
Well, it is.
It's
It
long
really
long
is.
high
I like
school,
that.
and I get a piece of paper, and that's and that's really what you did. I mean.
Well, and in the trade school, you're actually working. You're physically working. In college, you're, unless you have a
Bringing
job,
value.
you're not actually, working.
With that being said,
Yes.
thank you guys so much. This is a great discussion. And thank you guys for coming in, supporting, and being a part of this.
Thank you.